as we get started on our fourth class. All right, fourth class, we're past the middle. Um, I will just dedicate the class is series is sponsored by the Okrant and Bogdansky families in memory of Howard F. Okrant and Chaim Ben Zov, Zichronam Libracha. May we be blessed with good health and long life. Amen. Okay, and of course, our learning should be in the zchut of refuah shlema for everyone who needs it, and for the success of our soldiers, and that they should stay warm in this cold, wet weather, and the success of our leaders, and Besorot Tovot. Okay, so after we took a look at security, the army, the Great Aliyah, economy. Now we're going to get into something that is in some ways, I think, a touchy subject. Some people might feel this way. In some ways, it's going to seem like so many things that we've talked about, very, very, very different than our reality. In other ways, it's very much the same. And you'll see what I mean as we go along, even though the majority parties have changed. The tone of some of the conversations, unfortunately, have stayed the same, which is depressing, but also, you sort of say, okay, we got through that. We can get through this too. There's nothing new under the sun. So our topic today is government, Knesset Israel. And the question really that stood before our leadership in 1948 is, how do we form a government after 2,000 years? Or some people would say, how do we form a democracy for the first time ever, right? Even though we had sovereignty at various points in Jewish history, we never had a democracy, a modern democracy. How do we have elections when you have thousands of new olim arriving every month? Okay, that's not a simple thing. So many languages, so many cultures. How do we integrate all these disparate groups and views? We've got revisionists, we've got socialists, we've got religious people, right? How do all these things come together or not? That's really what we're going to explore, the history of the Knesset, political parties, elections, and some of the major players. The picture is actually not from the first elections, it's from the third elections in 1955. We're going to see we had three elections within 7 years, okay? 6 years, 1949, 1951, 1955, and these are Jews from Cochin, India, in Misilat Zion, halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And here they are, lined up at the Kalpi, at the voting booth for the elections for the third Knesset. Okay, as we like to do, let's take a quick look at the timeline. Okay, some of the things you're going to say, what do they have to do with what we're talking about? You'll see as we go along. Okay, two very dramatic and certainly in the first case, very traumatic events that happened in 1948 that are going to have an impact on the first Knesset elections. Okay? The story of the Altalena in June 1948, all right, the ship carrying arms bought by the Irgun, brought to the shores of Israel, fired upon by the Haganah. We'll talk about this story, but it definitely is going to have an effect on the elections. And less than 6 months later, Ben Gurion dismantles the Palmach, the elite unit of the Haganah. So just keep those in the back of your mind. January 25th, 1949, the war isn't even completely over, right? It finally ends, if you may recall from the first class, in March of 1949. But even before that, we have our first Knesset elections. Okay? The first Knesset is convened 3 weeks later, February 14th, 1949. Okay? We're going to see that the Knesset moves around. Okay? It doesn't have a permanent home till 1966. Okay? It meets in Tel Aviv, then it meets in Jerusalem, in what today has finally become the Knesset Museum. Okay? And eventually, as we see at the bottom here, in 1966, we have the new Knesset building, the building that we know today in Givat Ram. Okay, elections, again, July 1951, again, July 1955. In between a story that we're going to get to only at the very end of this class, and that's the story of what's called the Lavon affair. Okay, Israeli spies captured in Egypt. That's going to have a great impact on Israeli politics, besides the fact the human cost of two people who committed suicide and two people who were executed. But again, something to keep in the back of your mind. We'll come back to it. In 1957, 1958, in 1957, we have a terror attack in the Knesset. A Jew who comes in, throws a grenade, and in response, security measures are implemented, which today, if you've been to the Knesset, you know the security there is insane, right? But the first 10 years, it's really not like that. And it's only in 1958 that we have the Knesset Guard, and it's an impact of this assassination attempt. Okay, so that's just to give us our larger picture. Let's go into details. Okay, so first of all, the Knesset, right? We don't really think about it. We just say, oh, the Knesset, Israel's parliament. But think about the name for a minute. It's sort of a strange name. Okay, the name comes from the assembly of the first really great assembly after First Temple times, what's called the Knesset Hagdolah, or Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. This is a concept that we have in rabbinic literature. Okay? In Navi, in Ezra Nehemiah, we hear about important people. We hear about prophets. We hear about people who seem to be part of the kind of this covenant. We don't have that term Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, but the rabbis talk about it, okay, very famously in the very first Mishnah in Avot, right? Part of the chain of tradition. This is the first assembly of people who are not prophets or kings, right? That's part of the reason why we choose this term. Moshe received the Torah at Sinai, transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly, Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. They said three things: be patient in the administration of justice, raise many disciples, make a fence around the Torah. The rabbis continue and talk about these Anshe Knesset Hagdolah as doing many significant things. Okay, they start with Ezra, they go till the time of the Hasmoneans. We don't really have, besides Ezra and Nehemiah and the names in those books, any knowledge about any of these people. The only one we really know about is someone named Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Just. Okay, but according to the rabbis, the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah established all sorts of things. They established the Shmona Esrei, right? The 18 blessings of the Amidah. They established the idea that you have to learn Torah on a regular basis. They are, along with Ezra, the ones who decide on the modern writing, the Ketav HaShuri that we do today, many, many other things. Okay, so they are very significant in Chazal, rabbinic literature, and Chazal also tell us how many they are, 120. Along comes a very interesting fellow named Zorach Warhaftig, who's one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. He's in the first Knesset, and he says this is going to be our inspiration for not only the name of our governing body, our legislative body, but also the number. Okay? Just like the Knesset Hagdolah was 120, we are going to be 120. And just we'll read his quote in a minute, but just Haftig, very, very interesting person. Born in 1906 in Warsaw. Okay, so he's a mature person by the time of World War II, and he tries to go and save the Jews, particularly the yeshiva students in Vilna and in Kovno. And if you've heard of Chiune Sugihara, the Japanese consul, who saves 6,000 Jews by just signing visas, somebody had to come up with that scheme. It wasn't Sugihara all by himself, and Warhaftig, along with a few other people, came up with the way that Sugihara could really save all these people. So he gets some of that credit as well. He escapes the Nazis as well, goes to Vancouver, and then very soon afterwards, 1947, he's already in the state of Israel, and he signs the Declaration of Independence. He helps choose the symbols of the state. He's involved in writing the law of return. And one of his major principles, what he says here, right? Ani mechapes b'chol darkenu b'chol chidush chayenu hamidiyim kesher im hamasoret shelanu. I search always for any, in everything that we do and in every renewal in our government lives a connection to our tradition. We are renewing a very ancient state. הפרלמנט הראשון אחרי שיבת ציון הראשונה היה הכנסת הגדולה. The first parliament after the first return to Zion was the Knesset הגדולה. מספר חברי הכנסת הגדולה היה 120. We're 120. We had 120. So just like that Shivat Zion gets a Knesset, this Shivat Zion gets a Knesset too, right? Really beautiful connection between those two ideas. Okay, where are they going to go? Where are they going to meet? Okay, so at first, if you recall, the Declaration of Independence, right, is not given in the natural place one would assume it should be given, which is Jerusalem. Okay, Jerusalem, when the state is declared, is under siege. And so the state is declared in Tel Aviv, in the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, right? What we call today Independence Hall. Right? Many people can't get to Jerusalem because it's under siege. After that, we have the very first session of the Knesset is in the Jewish agency buildings in Jerusalem, but soon afterwards, they move to Tel Aviv for about a year, right? Because Tel Aviv is more secure at that point. We're talking about 1949. And also, it seems strange to say it, right? Jerusalem has so much symbolic importance. And yet, okay, the Zionist organizations, the Zionist offices, the first bank, all these things were really in Tel Aviv. It's only when the British mandate comes and says, the High Commissioner is going to be in Jerusalem, that we suddenly say, Jerusalem, oh yeah, right? It's not that we don't think about Jerusalem, but everything sort of developed in Tel Aviv. Ben Gurion, when the UN says, oh, Jerusalem should be international, Ben Gurion says, we're going to move the Knesset to Jerusalem. But in the beginning, they meet in Tel Aviv. Where do they meet? Hey, it's a movie theater. It's called the Kesem Theater. Hey, and it's got this kind of very distinctive, these triangular windows. Hey, this great picture over here on the right, you can see the building in the background. This is when Theodor Herzl's body, his coffin, is brought from Vienna to be reburied on Mount Herzl. And at first, they have, a state gathering, I guess, not really a funeral, at this Kesem Theater. And you can see the beach on the side here. This building is eventually knocked down, but first it becomes the Opera House of Tel Aviv. And today, if you want to find out where this building is, go to Tel Aviv. There's a building called Migdal HaOpera, the Opera Tower. It's no longer an opera. It's not the same building. It's named after that. Okay? So in late 1949, 1950, the Knesset moves to Jerusalem. In the beginning, they don't have an appropriate place. They meet in the buildings of the Jewish Agency, right? The national buildings on King George Street, but they're looking for something more appropriate, and they decide to go with this building. Okay, this building was built by a family called the Fruman family. The Fruman family made their money from cookies, from biscuits at the Fruman Biscuit Factory, which were around like till relatively recently. Right? Now they started to build this very lovely building in 1947. With the war, all the building came to a stoppage, couldn't be done. But after the war is over, the government says, oh, this is a good place. Okay, the idea was it was meant to be stores and a bank on the bottom and residences on the top. It was supposed to be more floors. The bank had a big lobby, and that was appropriate for the Knesset. And so the government takes it over, very hastily finishes it, and moves, the Knesset moves in March 13th, 1950. Okay. Now, this building has a very interesting afterlife. Okay. When the new Knesset is moved, and we'll talk about that in a minute, when it's finally finished in 1966, and it's moved, this building, anyone who's lived in Jerusalem for a while knows the incarnations of this building. Okay? This building becomes the tourism ministry. Okay? After that, it becomes the offices of the chief rabbinate. Okay? But at a certain point, it's sold to a developer. His name is Ilan Rejwan, and he buys it for $10 million, 10 million shekel, excuse me. He buys it for 10 million shekel, and he's going to tear it down. And he's going to build what developers build, right? Some skyscraper. And there's a huge public outcry. This is the first Knesset. How can, nobody cared about the Kesem Theater, but this, how could you possibly tear down this building? And there's this huge public outcry. And finally, the government passes a law, 2010, Chok Muzeon HaKnesset, the Knesset Museum Law, that this building is going to be turned into a museum. And what they do is they buy back the building from the developer. Recall he had paid 10 million shekel. We buy it back. The government buys it back for 47 million shekel. So the developer did very nicely on this deal. Okay, and then it took literally 15 years for the building to be finally finished. Today, the Knesset Museum is finished. It's really fantastic. It's beautiful. This is a picture from it on the right. I highly recommend anybody's around to go. We'll get to the newest building in a moment, but first, the Knesset gets gifts, right? This is, we are a new nation. Other nations want to show their admiration for us. So the Knesset receives two very significant gifts. One you've definitely, well, both you've probably seen, but only one you've seen near the Knesset. Okay, the first one is the famous Knesset menorah. Okay, the British Parliament decides that they are encouraged by Edwin Samuel, Herbert Samuel, the High Commissioner of Palestine, his son. He encourages the British to give a gift to the new state, right? Bygones be bygones. They approach a Jewish sculptor named Beno Elkan, who makes this menorah, which has all kinds of scenes from Jewish history on it, and they present it in 1956 to the Knesset. Now, this menorah today, right, if you go to the Knesset, there's a special little small park right across from the Knesset, and you can see the menorah. But the menorah was originally near the original Knesset, and it's in the place where today we call it the horse park, Gan Hasus, but it used to be called Gan HaMenorah. Okay, right next to, not far from the Marshpier on King George Street. So that's the menorah. The other gift that the Knesset got that very few people know that it was a gift to the Knesset is the Liberty Bell from Friends of Israel in Philadelphia. Okay, they in 1955 decide to give Israel a replica of the Liberty Bell that also will be put near the Knesset, except it doesn't. It ends up eventually in the Rose Garden across from the Knesset. And in 1976, when Teddy Kollek, the mayor of Jerusalem, decides to make a new park in honor of the bicentennial, 1976, okay, he says, oh, let's put a replica of the Liberty Bell there. Let me get a replica of the Liberty Bell. Then he says, oh, you know what? We have a replica of the Liberty Bell. And he goes to the Knesset. He says, can I have our Liberty Bell? And they say, sure. And today it's in Gan HaPamon in Liberty Bell Garden. So those are the two gifts that they get. Just to round out the story of where the Knesset is, eventually Beit Fruman it's not a good choice, right? It was necessary, it was chosen, everything was kind of very last minute in the 1950s, but it's not a great choice. It's in the middle of a commercial street. It's very hard to have security. It's disturbing for people. We're going to see that in a moment. And it's not big enough. And so eventually money is raised by the Rothschild Foundation, and the decision is to make a new campus. Where are they going to make it? In the West, right? Jerusalem before 1967 can only grow to the West. Okay? Already in the 50s, Binyanei Alma, the International Convention Center, is being built. In the 60s, the Israel Museum, that's what you see here on the right, and the Knesset is built in the same area. It used to be an Arab village called Sheikh Badr, conquered by Israel in 1948. The Arabs left, they ran away, and this area becomes the government area, the university area, right? The cultural area, museums, all sorts of things, because this is the place where there's room. And the Knesset foundation is laid. So you're seeing over here, the cornerstone is laid in 1958. The money is, as we said, from Rothschild. This is a competition, an architect's competition for designing the building. It's won by somebody named Yosef Klarwein. And of course, as with everything in Israel, people don't like it. right? They say, oh, it looks too much, too Greek. Why do we need Greek? What do we need the Parthenon? This is, Jewish. We don't like this building. Other people say, oh, he was only chosen because he has connections, because he has protexias. We're going to see that's not such a crazy accusation in the 1950s. And in the end, other architects are brought in to modify the design. A father and son team, Dove and Ram Karni. Years later, Ram Karmi and his sister Ada are going to make the Supreme Court, right? The kind of the counterpart to the Knesset down the block from it. Dani Karavan is also a very important architect. And this is the building that we end up with. Inside, all kinds of priceless artwork, like tapestries and mosaics made by Chagall. We have stuff by another Israeli artist, Moshe Kastel, right? And the Knesset is its own story. But let's go back to our Knesset on King George Street, right? So this is a very hard place to secure, and when it is secured, it's very annoying to people because this is the center of town. People are walking, people are doing their errands. Anyone who's in Israel in the last few months knows King George is a disaster area right now because the light rail is being built. Imagine having to deal with security round the clock for all of these VIPs. And in fact, the security was not so great, right? When you go to the Knesset Museum, you see that those first years, people just could walk in off the street with barely any identification. Already, like we talked about last time, 2 times ago, we talked about the reparations money, right? And how there was this huge battle over it, and Begin marching on the Knesset, and people coming and actually attacking the Knesset. And that's the picture that you see over here on the left, throwing stones, Molotov cocktails. So the Knesset is not in a great place to be protected, but nothing is really done about that until October 29th, 1957. Okay? At 6 p.m., a gentleman named Moshe Dweck walks in off the street, and he sits in the visitors gallery, okay, above where the Knesset members sit. And he has in his pocket a hand grenade, which nobody noted as he walked in. And he threw the hand grenade. His goal was to assassinate Ben Gurion. He was unsuccessful, fortunately. He injured 2 other people, Moshe Carmel, Minister of Transportation, and Chaim Moshe Shapira, the Minister of Religion. And he also injures Ben Gurion and Golda lightly. All of them are okay. Dweck is immediately grabbed by the people who are right next to him. He's taken into custody. It turns out that he had sued Jewish Agency for damages. He had been rejected. He threatens the president of the Supreme Court. He's sent to a mental hospital, right? There's a whole backstory here, and he wants to assassinate the prime minister that same night, right? This is very Israeli. We don't let anything stop us or stand in our way. We're going to keep on going. So this had happened at 6 p.m. At 9 p.m., the Knesset reassembles to show, yes, everything's okay. We're all right. Dweck gets 15 years in prison. When he comes out of prison, he actually forms a political party called Tarshish that seeks out equal rights for immigrants from Arab countries. So fascinating. But the most immediate impact of what he does is that many changes are made to the security of the Knesset. Okay? Partitions between the visitors gallery and the hall where the members sit. Visitors are checked, their bags are checked, right? All these things that we take for granted. And there's a creation of something called the Knesset Guard, Mishmar HaKnesset, which you can see here. Mishmar HaKnesset is probably most famous to us because they do these very ceremonial marches at the Yom Ha'atzmaut celebrations or at state funerals, but they also are Mishmar Knesset. They also guard the Knesset. And if you've ever come near the Knesset, you know that you'll be stopped a half a block away by guards who will ask you, where are you going? Do you have weapons, right? They're much more careful. Okay. First elections. We said January 25th, 1949. Before we get into who are the parties and what are people voting for? We have this beautiful diary entry. This came out, I don't know, a few elections ago. We've had so many elections in the last few years, but somebody published this just because it's really beautiful and it's something that we need to be reminded of. Um, Elections are a historic moment, and certainly the first elections in the state of Israel. You can see Vera Weitzman and Chaim Weitzman going to vote, right? They are the president and the first lady. They're going, he's not yet the president, but he's still so important. And they go to vote. But this is from a regular guy. His name is Moshe Alpert, third generation living in Israel, religious guy. And this is how he writes about that first election. Election day, 24th of Tevet, January 25th. After drinking our morning coffee, we dressed in our Shabbat attire in honor of this great and sacred day. This is the day God has made to be happy and rejoice. The entire way I marched along as if it was Simchat Torah, as if I was carrying the Sefer Torah in my arms and doing hakafot, simply because my Israeli identification card was in my hands. There were no limits to the happiness and joy I felt that morning. Okay, and then he goes on. It's actually very humorous. If you want to Google Moshe Alpert at first elections, read the whole thing. I only brought you a little piece. He gets there at the Kalpi is supposed to open at 6. He gets there at 5:55. What's the matter? Why aren't you open yet? Right? He's very yuckish, but I skipped that part. And with a trembling hand and with a sense of holiness, I took a voting slip with the letter Bet, the list of the United Religious Parties, Ichud Hadati. I put it in the envelope that the head of the committee had given me. I went back to the polling room. I showed everyone I had only one envelope. And then I experienced the holiest moment in my life, a moment that my father and grandfather were not privileged to experience. Only I, in my lifetime, was privileged to be at such a holy and pure moment. Ashrei li v'ashrei chelki. Happy and blessed am I, happy and blessed is my portion. I made the Shechayanu blessing and I deposited the envelope in the ballot box. We have been through too many elections and too much political machinations, and we've become very cynical. And sometimes it's good to read something like this and to understand the historic moment that we live in. Back to our parties. Okay, most of the political parties exist before the state exists. Okay, there have been elections for the Zionist Congresses. There have been elections for the Histadrut. Okay, most Jews before the Great Aliyah come to Israel as part of youth movements, right? They're Beitari, they're Shomer Atzair, whatever youth movement they belong to, and that's their politics come with them. There are four basic groups, right? There's the right, which is kind of pro-free market, and we won't get into the military elements at the moment. There's the left, which is socialist. There are the religious, who have pieces of both of those, okay? Meaning there are Poalei Mizrahi, Poalei Aguda, the workers of the Mizrahi, right? There are socialist and non-socialist religious. And then there are interest groups, right? The Arabs, Witzo, the Women's Party, Sfardim, right? Various interest groups. In general, from the 1930s, national power resided with the left parties. Municipal power, city power, resided with the rights, which is actually very interesting when you travel around Israel, right? And you know so many places that were made in the 50s when the Mapai, right, the left parties were so powerful, and yet the streets in many places, like in Sfat, like in Cholon, are named after really heroes of the Irgun and the Lechi. Right? That's a very interesting distinction. One of the real difficulties of these first few elections is how do you have the Olim, the new immigrants, vote? We want them to vote. They are citizens of Israel, and yet they don't have an address. Many of them don't have an identity card. They're coming 30,000 a month, right? This is a very large issue. It's a large problem to solve. Okay, what are our issues in the very first election, in 1949? Mostly the election is not about the future as much as it's about the past. Who won the war? Okay, so Cherut, Begin's party, the party of the Irgun, says we rebelled against the British. Mapam, the Mifleget HaPoalim, they say, well, we are the ones who fought, right? The Palmach, we fought. The Mapai, Mifleget Poalei Eretz Yisrael, Ben Gurion's party says, well, we're the ones who ran the war. In the background, there are these wedge issues. One of them, of course, is the Altalena. And in June 1948, when the various groups that made up Jewish self-defense, Haganah, the Irgun, the Lehi, are supposed to have already been dissolved and everybody become Tzahal, become the IDF. The Irgun brings in a ship of weapons. Ben Gurion says, you cannot keep that for yourselves. You are not meant to be your own separate. He's very worried. He's always worried from the left and the right about a military coup. We want to take those weapons. Begin says no. The ship comes in to the shores of Tel Aviv. Ben Gurion orders to fire upon the ship. Begin, in what he said was the most proud moment of his life, refuses to fire back. Right? But this is something, as you can see, these amazing, crazy pictures. If you Google Altalena, people standing on the shores of Tel Aviv watching this almost civil war happening, right? And this is something that the Irgun and the followers of Begin are never going to forget. On the one hand, Ben Gurion, on the other hand, is never going to forget it because did you want to have a coup? Why did you do this? Okay, so this is an issue that is in the back of people's minds. Another issue is the dismantling of the Palmach. Okay? Palmach, the elite units, the elite fighting units of the Haganah, okay? Fighting in almost all the important battles all over Israel. In November 1948, Ben Gurion, who, like we said, afraid of a military coup, orders the Palmach to be dismantled. Okay? Says no politics are allowed in the army. But there's a party, the Mifleget HaPoalim, which Mifleget Poalim Meuchedet, which is essentially made up of Palmach officers, and they are very angry with Ben Gurion. So on the right and on the left, we have issues that are in the background, and we have very, very bitter first and second elections. Everyone delegitimizes everybody else. Okay, take a look at this election poster, which is, or we didn't even actually say the main parties. Okay, the main parties are the Mapai, Mifleget Poalei Eretz Yisrael. Okay, that's Ben Gurion's party. Cherut, which is Begin's party. The Mapam, right? Mifleget Poalim Meuchedet, which is largely Palmach officers, more socialist, more left wing. We have the various religious parties, which are united in the first election, split up in the second election, and then we said all these smaller parties. Take a look at this election poster for the Mapai, right? For Ben Gurion's party. Aleph, right? Everybody has a letter. Ba'amal kapayim, we are workers. We are going to build the state with our hands, with our tools. Who are we facing against? Okay, this rooster, who of course is Begin. Behevel peh, all he does is talk, right? This is pretty bad, okay? Everybody delegitimizes everybody else, okay? Ben Gurion says to Begin, you're a windbag, you're a fascist, okay? This is what we're seeing in this poster. Begin calls Ben Gurion, and I am not exaggerating, this is actually what he calls him. He says he's part of the Judenrat, okay? The Jews who helped to assist the Nazis. Ben Gurion says to the Mapam, to the Palmach party, you're taking orders from Moscow. Everybody has these horrible things to say about everybody else, okay? The poster over here, I think, really says it all. This is from the second elections, okay, for all the voters, the Chot Tzibor HaBocharim, Upilei HaMiflagot, and the campaigners in the different parties. בשם מניעת הפרעות בפעולות הסברה לקראת הכנסת השנייה, התכנסו כל הסיעות והמפלגות הנקובות מטה והחליטו פה אחד לפנות אל ציבור הבוחרים בתביעה ובאזהרה שלא להשבית את המהלך הסדיר של התעלומה No violence, no violence, no destruction. You can't stop people from going close to, from campaigning. We have laws in Israel that you can't campaign right next to the election booths, right next to the kalpi. This is coming out of this, right? No violence. But the fact that they even have to say that, that's rather disturbing. Okay? The results. Okay, the first thing that I want you to notice about these three, and you're not going to notice everything because there's just too much going on here. But what I want you to notice first is the voter turnout. Okay, we have not ever had voter turnout like this ever again. And turnout in the first elections, almost 87% of the population. That's unbelievable, right? These are people who are living in tents in Ma'abarot. Everybody shows up to vote. 1951, a little bit down, 75%, 1955, 82%. These are crazy, crazy voter turnouts. So that's just very interesting. The next thing to notice is that the runaway winner, and this never happens today anymore, and you never get a party that gets 45, 46, 40 seats. Hey, Mapai, Ben-Gurion's party is the runaway winner always. Hey, and then you have differences in second place. Hey, now, first of all, why is Ben-Gurion's party the runaway winner? Partly because he's really seen as such a significant figure as the father of his country, but partly because the Mapai runs a lot of the immigrant camps, the Mabarot, and they come to the Mabarot and they give them ID cards and they enroll them in the health funds and they tell them where they're going to go to work. And they also say, this is the party you should vote for. What do these guys know? They don't really know anything. They're new immigrants. They say, vote for us and we'll get you a job and we'll get you housing and we'll get you everything you need. They vote for them. So that's the Mapai are really the big winners. And then you can see in the various elections, we have different runners up. Okay. Mapam, Pamach Party, very important, gets a lot of seats in the first election, somewhat fewer in the second and in the third. Okay. Cherut, Begin's party, also does very well. First election, not as well the second, but the third election goes back up very, very much. Okay? A party that kind of shows up and gets much, much stronger in this second election is what's called the General Zionists, Hatzionim HaKlaliyim. Why did they do so well in the second election? Because they campaign against the tzena. They campaign against austerity. And they say, Tznu lichiot ba'aretz hazot. And people who have been living on the amounts of food that we talked about last time, they say, we like this party, right? So you really have Ben-Gurion has to make a decision. Who is he going to go with to make his government, right? And you could say, okay, logical choice, go with the other socialists, go with the Mapam. Less logical choice, but perhaps also good choice, go with Begin, right? Make a unity government. He refuses to go with either of those. Okay? He makes a very strict rule which is no Cherut, no Begin, no Maki, no communists. And he doesn't say it out loud, but he also says no Mapam, no Pamachniks. Who are his natural partners? And this is still true today. That's what I said in the beginning today. The more things change, the more things stay the same. His natural partners are the religious parties. Okay, the Chazit Hadatit HaMeuchedet, the Poalei Aguda, the Poalei Mizrachi. Why are they his natural partners? Not because they're like him, but because they will go with the flow in order to get their own education system, their own budget, and they're happy to go along with what the ruling party says. And so the natural coalition partners in every one of these first three elections are the religious parties. Okay? And this is something that has still carried on in Israel till today. And then he takes in also the Arabs, the progressives, right? But he leaves out Beirut, okay? He leaves out Begin. Begin is eternally in the opposition until 1977. Okay? Chayerut grows very strong in the opposition because they become the voice of all of these disenfranchised people, right? All the people who are not in the establishment, who are not the people who were here since 1905, the Olim, the Mizrahim, the poor, anyone who's not an elite, Chayerut becomes their voice. Okay? Begin becomes their voice, and they finally get to power in 1977. But the others who are kicked out are a little less intuitive, right? Mifleget HaPoalim HaMiuchedet, right? These are the Palmach, mostly Palmach guys. Ben-Gurion doesn't want them because he's worried about them. He's worried that they're going to seize power. They are also too socialist. They're much more socialist. Ben-Gurion's very practical socialist. They are much more socialist. They want to nationalize everything. They want to include the Arabs in everything. They don't want any kind of religion. So they're too extreme. And the most extreme that Ben-Gurion kicks out, and it's hard to even believe today that there is such a party, but a party called Maki, the Israeli Communist Party. And the Israeli Communist Party starts out strong-ish, right? Where are communists? Four seats. Okay, by the time we get to, they get 5 seats in 1951, but by the time we get to, I don't know, I take it back. 1955, they're still doing well, but by the 60s, they are not doing well at all because Stalin, people start to understand who Stalin is, because the Soviet Union is on the side of the Arabs, and the communists become more and more and more fringe and eventually disappear. Okay, now we've had our elections. We have our first Knesset session, which happens, very nice birthday of the Knesset, they still celebrate today, is Tu B'Shvat, right? Tu B'Shvat, February 14th, 1949. Chaim Weizmann is elected the president, and he gives the opening address in the Knesset where he emphasizes certain things. He emphasizes Jewish suffering, he emphasizes redemption, and he emphasizes our responsibility to our society, our responsibility to the world. Right? It is with a sense of honor and awe that I rise to open the Constituent Assembly of the State of Israel, the first Jewish assembly of our day in Jerusalem, the eternal city. At this great moment in the history of our people, we give thanks and praise to the God of Israel, by whose grace we have been privileged to see redemption after generations of suffering and misery. It has been the lot of our generation to renew the tradition of liberty, which was severed by tyrants 1900 years ago. I do not know why this generation in particular has the privilege of fulfilling the desires of all the previous ones, which rotted in the gloom of the diaspora. It may be because of all the suffering and pain which have beset us the last 70 years, as one limb after another was severed from the body of our nation. Until of late, a third of our number was destroyed. No nation in the world has suffered as we have, but at last the vision of redemption has been fulfilled. It is our lot to bear the heavy burden of responsibility for filling the gap which has been created in the ranks of our people with the murder of the best of its sons, the bearers of its standards, and the carriers of its culture. Our nation once gave the entire world the spiritual message which became the foundation of human society. The world is watching and waiting now to see what path we choose for ourselves in arranging our lives and what the character of our state will be. It is listening intently to hear whether a new message will go forth from Zion and what this message will contain. I realize that we keep flipping back and forth between these very beautiful, very powerful messages of redemption and the much more messy facts on the ground, but that's what it is. That's life in Israel. Um, One of the things that is Israel is very famous or infamous for is that we don't actually have a constitution. And this goes back to that first Knesset as well. In 1950, a decision is made in the Knesset, it's called Hachlatat Harari, after a Knesset member named Harari, that there will be a committee to make gradual, basic laws, Chukot Yesod. Eventually, little by little, chapter by chapter, these laws will come together to form a constitution. Famously, this never happens. Why does this never happen? For the same reason in 1950 as in 2025. We have values and ideas that are unsolvable. Some of our conflicts are unsolvable. We have to ask a very basic question of what is our national identity? Who are we? Are we democratic? Are we religious? Are we Jewish? Are we Arab? Are we a state of all our citizens? We have so many conflicts that we have not resolved. Um, so some laws are passed. The Knesset is the legislature, right? What's the role of the president? Jerusalem as capital, right? These laws are passed over decades. In the 1990s, a very activist Supreme Court under Aaron Barak basically rules that the basic laws are more important than ordinary laws, and they can override over ordinary laws. By doing this, he de facto gives, first of all, huge power to the court, and second, sort of makes a constitution. This leads to what we've been seeing in the past few years, interrupted by the war, the entire enormous conflict over judicial reform. How much power should the Supreme Court have? How much power should the Knesset have? What is our Constitution, right? All of this is rooted in the inability to make a decision in the 1950s about what our Constitution should be. Right, this is a much, much larger topic that we are not going to go into, but I did bring you a picture of protests by the Knesset 2.5 years ago, right before the war. As many of us remember, this was an enormous flashpoint conflict in Israel. Okay, so we've said who holds the political power, right? But the political power also has an economic power as well, right? Um, the workers' union, the Histadrut, is essentially, it's founded in 1920 to protect the workers, but by 1950, it is essentially an arm of the government. It is works together with Mapai, with Ben Gurion, and not only does it represent the workers, but it owns most of the means of production. Right? So the main bank is Bank Hapoalim, owned by the Histadrut. The main building company, Soleil Bonnet, building all the housing for the new immigrants, building the roads, owned by the Histadrut. The shipping company Zim, owned by the Histadrut. The main health fund, Clalit, owned by the Histadrut. Public transportation, insurance, everything. Okay, they hire the employees. They also represent the employees. They are very, very close with the ruling party, so they get preferential treatment. And it's all one piece. People with the right connections get jobs, and conversely, people with the wrong connections don't get jobs. Right? And this is a very, very difficult thing that takes a very long time to unravel. Okay? If you are a Histadrut member, okay, in 1955, 86% of schirim, of hired workers, belong to the Histadrut. Almost everyone is in the Clalit Health Fund because they come to the Ma'abarot, to the immigrant camps. They say, this is your health fund. This is the people who are going to give you a job. This is the people that you're going to vote for. Okay. Not a free market, very much socialist, and representing the workers and the companies at the same time. Okay. Now, all of this, who gets the jobs, who holds the power, is discriminating against people who are supporters of Cherut, who were in the Irgun, who were in the Lehi, who are followers of Begin. It is much harder for them to get jobs, to get positions. Right? So while we are in a democracy, and it's not a complete socialist democracy. There is capitalism, there is a free market, but there's definitely discrimination against people who hold the wrong views. The picture over here is of Ze'ev Jabotinsky, of course, the founder of the revisionists, the rabbi of Menachem Begin. He died in the United States. His body, Ben Gurion refuses to bring his body to be buried in Israel. Okay, it's a completely political decision. He sees him as a fascist. He will have nothing to do with him. It's only in 1963, when Levi Eshkol becomes prime minister, that Jabotinsky and his wife are brought for burial on Mount Herzl. So there are great divides here. Okay, I want us to have some time to talk for a few minutes about various personalities. First of all, the presidents, okay? The very first president of Israel is Chaim Weizmann. Chaim Weizmann was one of the most important of the Zionist leaders before the state is founded. He's the head of the World Zionist Organization. He's instrumental in having the British issue the Balfour Declaration. He speaks before the world about in the Peel Commission, talking about Jews who have nowhere to go. Right, he very presciently says there are 6 million. This is in 1937. There are 6 million Jews in the world who have nowhere to go. Okay. Um, He's, of course, a very important scientist who starts a research institute in Rehovot that eventually is named after him. By 1948, he is much more of a figurehead. He's appointed the first president because of all that he's done, but he's very disappointed in the president's role. And he's very disappointed that he really doesn't have anything important to do. And he's old and he's sick. He doesn't even live in Jerusalem. His house, he has a beautiful house. If you live in Israel and you have an opportunity to go to the Weizmann Institute campus in Rehovot, it's Weitzman's house is a gorgeous house. It's a house that's befitting a president. He had his own money. He had his own fortune from his scientific discoveries. He didn't want to take any money from the government. He gets a very, very symbolic salary, and he builds this house with his own money. But he's very disappointed in the role that he has at the end of his life. He dies in office. He's president from February 49 till 1952 when he dies. The next president is also a very significant figure in the Zionist world. He and his wife Yitzhak Ben-Zvi and his wife Rachel Yanait Ben-Zvi are really a super Zionist power couple. They come to the land of Israel in the second Aliyah, like Ben Gurion. He's one of the founders of the Shomer, right, the precursors to the Haganah. He is very involved in many, many different roles in the Zionist movement, but he's also very much a scholar of Jewish history, of Jewish peoplehood. During the time of the Great Aliyah, he is fascinated by all these Olim and where they come from, and he has them come. We have Rosh Chodesh meetings here. You have a Jew from Zako who's coming to speak to him. He and his wife are also very, very, very socialist. When he becomes president, he says, I'm not moving into a mansion. I want to live in my tzrif. They have this little hut in Rehavia. This is where we're staying. And the government says, that's very nice, but when the president of this country or that country comes to visit you, you can't have them in your little hut. So they build kind of a larger, somewhat larger building. This was the president's house for many years. Nothing like the president's house of today. His wife has to convince him that he has to buy suits to serve as president. She said, "These are your work clothes. This is what you have to wear. You can't just wear, your work clothes." But Ben-Zvi, really a fascinating individual. And now let's take a look at a few personalities. So you cannot talk about this time period, or you really can't talk about the first 50 years of Israel before it becomes a state and after it becomes a state without talking about David Ben-Gurion. Here he is, of course, declaring statehood. He was the head of the Jewish Agency, is the executive head of the World Zionist Organization. He's essentially the de facto head of the Jewish Yishuv until 1948. He's the head of the Histadrut. He's in charge of the war. He is in charge of Mapai, right, of this political party. After 1948, his party wins. He becomes the prime minister. He becomes the minister of defense. He's a moderate socialist. He is, as we said, very against the revisionism of Jabotinsky, but he's also against the more radical socialism of other parties. Okay? He is fascinated by Tanakh, and he sees it as kind of our contract, right? The reason why we're able to have the land is because of Tanakh, because of the Bible, because of archaeology, the proof that we've been here. But he is very not interested in religion. Okay, so here he is as a Brit Milah, very nice, as like sort of a grandfatherly figure, but he's not interested in religion. he really believes that the future of the state is in the Negev, is in the desert, and he puts his money where his mouth is. And when he retires, he moves down to Kibbutz Sde Boker. He's prime minister from 1949 to 1953. There's a short interval where Moshe Sharet is prime minister from 53 to 55, and then he's prime minister again, 55 to 63. So really has an enormous impact on the state in those first early 15 years. His counterpart, even though he might not like to think of it that way, of course, is Menachem Begin. Okay, Menachem Begin is eternally in the opposition until the Mahapach, until the revolt in 1977. He comes from a very different background. Ben Gurion makes Aliyah with the second Aliyah, early 20th century. Begin, who's quite a bit younger than him, right? He is more than 25 years younger than Ben Gurion. He is in Russia. He's in Siberia. He's a very, very diligent follower of Jabotinsky, of revisionist Zionism. Eventually, he comes to the land of Israel only during World War II, becomes the head of the Irgun, and is this opponent of Ben Gurion. Just a few quotes. I'm sorry if they're only in Hebrew. Okay, Ben Gurion for a long time refused to call Begin by his name, and how he would address him in the Knesset. He would say, Ha'ish hayoshev liyad chaver Knesset Bader, the man who's sitting next to the Knesset member Bader. He wouldn't call him by his name. Begin spoke out against socialists who he saw as often very hypocritical. Right? He says, מעמד של הבורגנים ותעשיינים יהודים הרואים את עצמם עד היום קומוניסטים. There are these middle class industrialist Jews who still see themselves as communists, right? אלה שבשעתו ברחו מרדיפות נגד הקומוניסטים בארגנטינה. They ran away to Argentina when there were attacks on the communists. בינתיים התבססו יפה והם ראשי המנצלים. Meanwhile, they made a good living, and now they are the greatest of the people who take advantage of others. טוענים שהם קומוניסטים, they call themselves communists. אלא כדוגמת הסוציאליסטים שלנו, השונאים את בעלי ההון, ואוהבים רק את ההון. It's a great Begin line. It says that they're like the socialists who hate those who are wealthy, but they love the wealth. Right? They hate the guys who have the money, but they like the money, right? And now, of course, we have a speech after he finally wins the elections after 29 years in 1977. He says 29 years we lived under a regime of protectionism, that corrupted everything, and the citizen was dependent on the leadership for everything, for being able to make a living. Karanu dror lechol hatzibur ish lo talui ein aflaya. We've cried freedom for the whole public. Nobody's dependent on anyone. There's no discrimination between the members of one party and the members of another. We've cried freedom for our nation in this land. So Begin, fascinating figure. I think we have time for one more. We're not going to do the last two. I'll bring them over to next time. Levi Eshkol. Okay? Levi Eshkol is a fascinating figure. Okay? He comes to the land of Israel in 1914, and it seems that he does everything and he does it all at once. Okay? He's one of the founders of the Haganah, one of the founders of the Histadrut, of the Mikorot Water Company. He's the head of settlement, and he comes up with the idea of the Ma'abarot, of the transit camps. Okay? He is along with Simcha Blas, he's the guy who thinks about the national water carrier and makes the project happen. That's what you see on the 5 shekel note here. He is the Minister of Finance, and he creates the Bank of Israel. He's doing all these things at the same time. Okay? In 1963, he becomes prime minister. He is prime minister during the 6-Day War. Okay? He was very, very underappreciated in his time, and today people really acknowledge that he is one of the greatest of leaders. And also, besides all the other things he did, he was a person who had a really good sense of humor. And he had a very Yiddish sense of humor. He was very, very Jewish. I chose this quote just because it's such a great quote. Alpayim shana chikinu lamidina. 2,000 years we waited for a state. Dafka liza hayat tzarich likrot. I was lucky enough that it happened to me, meaning, really? Like I have to deal with all these problems, right? And many, many other great lines, right? Famously, he says, I compromise and I compromise till I get what I want. Okay. He says, I promised, but I didn't promise to keep my promise. Okay. He says there, if you put three Zionists in a room, you'll come out with four political parties, and many, many other phrases. And he really was, despite the way he looks, he actually had three wives in sequence, one after the other. And just a fascinating character. Okay, my last two are Golda and the Lavon affair, and I think we will keep them for next time because we really have gotten to 8 o'clock. But let's see if people have comments here or any other comments. 10 million lira for what, Susanna? I don't know what that's referring to.
You said 10 million shekel for that piece of property, but maybe I had the dates
Oh,
wrong.
no, 10 million shekel in 2000,
Yeah,
recently.
yeah.
Like it was
But
a
by the way,
recent thing.
am I the only person who didn't get the email to log in for today?
Oh, well, that happened again? Oh, great. I have to
It
tell
happened to
them.
me. It might be, I mean, did any,
No,
no,
a lot of
They
people.
think they're
I
having some
didn't get it
glitch. I
either.
will tell them.
what?
I
I
didn't get
told
it
them
either.
last week, but I guess it's still not working.
I didn't hear what,
Okay, the weapons on the Altalena were to free Jerusalem. Yeah, but that's not how Ben Gurion saw it. Okay, um, right, and then the evolutions of the various parties, right? Liberal wasn't less with capitalist, right? It depends on how you what your semantics and your language. But I agree, the parties changed, the parties developed.
No, no, but the
We don't have any of these
important
parties
thing,
anymore. They're all
because
different.
today people think liberal is some sort of leftist woke
Yeah, I
thing,
agree with you. The terms
or
have
an
changed.
anti-communist.
Yeah.
It's a very, and that's how we got rid of Agrexco and changed the entire system when after the Mapach, and the Mapach was the big surprise.
Yes, 100%. So if we ever do a series about the 70s, we will go there. All right. Any other comments, anybody? Questions, comments? Okay, no class next week. No class next week. Happy Hanukkah. Don't forget. I will tell them to send out a notice. We will reconvene on December 25th, but no class next week. Everyone should have a wonderful Hanukkah and good news for all. Laila Tov, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Shulie. Shabbat Shalom and Chanukah Sameach.
Thank you.